In our first case today, we will discuss the mysterious murder of an American woman and how it was solved with the help of technology. We will also witness the massacre inflicted upon a family and the sensational story behind it. If you're ready, this twisting journey into the limits of true crime filled with crime scene photos begins now. We travel to the state of Wisconsin, in the United States, to the life of Nicole Vander Hayden, who was born in 1985. A successful student throughout her academic life, Nicole was accepted into the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay in 2003, specializing in science and education. She earned a Bachelor of Science degree. Afterward, she began working as a teacher in Green Bay. In addition to her academic success, Nicole was, above all, a good mother. She had 2 children from a young marriage. In 2015, she met a man named Douglas Dietrich. They quickly decided to marry. On May 21, 2016, a Saturday, the mundane routine of the Brown County Sheriff's Office was interrupted when 35-year-old Douglas Dietrich walked in. He was there to report his wife missing. He explained to the officers on duty that Nicole had not returned home after a night out with friends. He told them this was highly abnormal, especially considering their 6-month-old son was at home. Douglas recounted that he too had been out separately but had returned home. When the police asked the standard critical question, why had he waited until the afternoon to report her missing, Douglas offered a plausible explanation. When he realized Nicole wasn't home, he had simply assumed she had stayed the night at a friend's house, perhaps having had too much to drink. He hadn't wanted to overreact. The police opened a missing person file, but before the search could even begin in earnest, a call came in that would turn a missing person case into a homicide investigation. The news was grim. A woman's body had been discovered in a farm field just 4 miles from Nicole's home. A farmer named Richard Van de Hey had made the gruesome find. The responding officers could not immediately identify the body, and due to the severity of the injuries, they couldn't initially confirm if it was Nicole. The body was so battered that it was unrecognizable. Dental records would be required to make a positive identification. In due course, the devastating confirmation came. It was Nicole. The scene where Nicole's lifeless body was found painted a picture of pure brutality. She was naked, except for a pair of socks and a bracelet. She had been savagely beaten and strangled. Her back and body were covered with numerous scratches and abrasions, evidence of a desperate struggle. The coroners noted a significant amount of blood around her head. The official cause of death was determined to be ligature strangulation and blunt force trauma to the head. The murder investigation began with the person closest to the victim, her husband, Douglas Dietrich. This is standard procedure, as statistics overwhelmingly show that intimate partners are the most likely culprits in such cases. Detectives descended upon the couple's home and car, executing search warrants and meticulously combing for any trace of evidence. They interviewed Douglas's friends and scrutinized his cell phone records, searching for any suspicious activity, any deviation from the norm. Initially, however, nothing incriminating stood out. The investigators then began the painstaking process of retracing Nicole and Douglas's steps on the night of the murder. They had arranged for a babysitter, planning a rare night out to unwind and have fun. The evening began well. They met up with friends at a bar in Green Bay called the Sardine Can. The group also had tickets for a concert at another bar, headlined by a band called Dead Ringer. After the concert, some of the group planned to move on to yet another establishment on South Broadway, the Andesees Sports Club. But the fabric of the evening began to fray. Douglas did not go to the concert with Nicole and her friends. Among those who did attend was a friend of Nicole's named Greg. Her husband, Douglas, was not happy about her going with Greg. A series of text messages sent from Douglas to Nicole revealed a dark undercurrent of jealousy and control. He referred to Greg as a creeper and a controlling person, projecting his own behavior onto the other man. He explicitly told Nicole he believed she was cheating on him, despite Douglas's controlling and accusatory texts. Nicole tried to enjoy her night. Security camera footage from the bar captured her in good spirits, dancing, talking, and laughing. With her friends, she was a young mother letting her hair down for a few hours, but as the night wore on, the pressure from Douglas mounted. The text messages continued, a relentless digital barrage of suspicion and anger. Though furious with Douglas, Nicole, ever the devoted mother, eventually decided to leave the bar. One of her friends, concerned by her abrupt departure, followed her out and pleaded with her to come back and not let her husband's behavior ruin her night. Nicole refused. Her friends watched as she walked down the street, talking on her cell phone. They saw her turn left at the end of the block and disappear into the night. It was the last time they would ever see her alive. For the police, the critical question was whether Nicole had ever made it home, and if she had, what had happened to her there. They quickly obtained a search warrant for the house. During their meticulous search, a series of items caught their attention, items that seemed to tell a story of a violent struggle within the home. They found a pair of shoes with marks, stains, and what appeared to be blood on them. These were collected for DNA testing. The shoes were particularly interesting because the marks on Nicole's body suggested she had been stepped on while lying on the ground. Furthermore, detectives noted what looked like bloodstains on the garage floor and inside Nicole's car. A terrifying theory began to form. Nicole had been murdered in her own home. The killer had then used her car to transport her body to the farm field, dumping her like refuse under the cover of darkness. 2 days after the discovery of Nicole's body, a neighbor called the police. They had found some items in their yard that they thought might be of interest. The neighbor reported finding a charging cable and a clump of blonde hair in their yard. There was also blood on the hair and on their driveway. Police responded to the scene and found the bloody hair, a hair clip, and 2 pieces of wire. The investigation continued to yield more evidence. It wasn't long before police found Nicole's clothing from the night of the murder. It had been discarded on the side of a highway, about 3 miles from where her body was found, soiled with dirt and blood. Her purse and cell phone had been tossed out at the same location, with a mountain of circumstantial evidence pointing toward a domestic dispute. Turned deadly, the conclusion seemed inescapable. As you might expect, her husband, Douglas Dutree, was arrested and sent to jail. The police were confident they had their man. All they needed were the DNA results to come back from the lab. Once they did, they believed Douglas would be charged with first-degree murder and the case would be closed. But then, the case took a shocking turn. The DNA results arrived from the crime lab, and they shattered the prosecution's theory. The DNA found in Nicole's socks, foreign DNA that almost certainly belonged to her killer, did not match Douglas Dutree. This was a bombshell. But it wasn't the only piece of evidence that began to unravel the case against him. Investigators determined that Douglas's car had not left the garage at the time of the incident, casting doubt on the theory that he had transported the body. The stains found in the vehicle, which initially appeared to be blood, tested negative. The blood on the garage floor turned out not to be human blood, while the blood found on the pair of shoes did test positive as human. It was not Nicole's blood. The final, irrefutable piece of evidence that would clear Douglas came from a source no one in 1989 could have ever imagined. His Fitbit. A forensics crime analyst named Tyler Belling examined the data from Douglas's fitness tracker. On the morning of the incident, the device had registered a mere 12 steps. This was digital proof that he had been at home, asleep, during the time of his wife's brutal and savage murder. It was an alibi, written not by a person, but by an algorithm. It was unshakable, despite the cloud of suspicion that had surrounded him. Douglas Dutree was released from prison. The police were left completely baffled. Their prime suspect, the man all the initial evidence seemed to point to, was innocent. They were back to square one with a brutal murder on their hands and no viable suspects. They began to fear that the Nicole van der Hayden case was destined to become another unsolved file, another cold case, another family left without justice. All the evidence had initially pointed to Douglas, but now that path was a dead end. The real killer was still out there, a ghost who had left his DNA behind, but had otherwise vanished into the night. 3 months after the discovery of Nicole van der Hayden's body, just as the investigation was growing cold and public interest was beginning to wane, the Brown County Sheriff's Office received a crucial call from the state crime lab. They had managed to extract a sufficient DNA profile from one of the socks Nicole was wearing when she was found. This was the DNA of her killer. The profile was immediately run through the National Criminal Database, CODIS, in a desperate search for a match. The result was another dead end. But then, a hit came from a different source. The DNA matched a man named George Stephen Birch. The name meant nothing to the investigators at first. A quick background check revealed that George Birch had recently moved to Wisconsin. But what was his connection to Nicole? How did their paths cross on that fatal night? As detectives dug deeper into Birch's background, they found that he was already on law enforcement's radar. He had been involved in a police pursuit related to a vehicle. He was connected with a vehicle that was part of a stolen car report, a car fire, and a hit-and-run incident. In a stroke of investigative luck, George Birch had actually been questioned by police in June 2016 regarding this hit-and-run case. During that interview, he told police that on the night of the incident, he had been at a bar and had been texting with a woman all night. As a way to verify his alibi, police asked for his permission to see the text messages. George agreed. He signed a consent form, allowing them to download the data from his phone. That downloaded data, that digital snapshot of his life, was sitting in his case file. The detectives investigating Nicole's murder discovered that Nicole's own cell phone data was in that same file. As they sifted through the downloaded information from Birch's phone, they noticed something critical: an email address belonging to George, linked to a Google account. They realized this was their key. With a warrant, they could access Google's vast repository of location data. They could potentially create a minute-by-minute timeline of George Birch's movements on the night Nicole was killed. The GPS data they received from Google was a revelation. It painted a damning and chilling picture. On the night of the murder, George Birch had been at the Sardine Can, the same bar as Nicole, located just 800 meters away. His phone data showed he left the bar at 2:30 a.m. From there, the digital breadcrumbs led him directly to Nicole's home. He stayed there from 3 a.m. to 4 a.m., the exact window of time in which the murder was believed to have occurred. But the trail didn't stop there. The GPS data then showed him traveling to the farm field where Nicole's body was later found, and then to the highway location where her clothes were discarded. It was a digital ghost, silently tracking the killer's every move. Furthermore, an examination of Birch's internet history revealed he had viewed 64 news articles related to Nicole's death. He was following the case. He was watching. George Birch was arrested and charged with first-degree intentional homicide. He pleaded not guilty. The prosecution's case was built on a foundation of modern technology. They focused on the data extracted from Birch's cell phone and Google account, contrasting it with the Fitbit data that had exonerated Douglas Dietrich. Douglas himself took the stand at the trial. He testified that he had met Nicole in 2015, and that, although things were good initially, their relationship was far from perfect. The jury also heard disturbing information that cast Douglas in a very negative light. In February 2017, Nicole's sister had stayed at their home to help care for their nephew. What happened next was sickening. While in the car, Douglas had touched the girl's leg for sexual purposes. Nicole's sister was reported to have said, "Please don't do that." This allegedly angered Douglas, who then began to drive at high speed. Nicole's sister begged him to stop and let her out, but Douglas refused, continuing to drive erratically. She was finally able to get him to stop by repeatedly kicking the car's windshield. This testimony, while shocking, was ultimately deemed irrelevant to the murder trial itself. Birch's defense attorneys fought back with a bold and dramatic counternarrative. They claimed that Douglas Dietrich was the real killer. They argued that Nicole and George had engaged in consensual sex in George's car outside her home. According to their theory, Douglas had caught the two of them in the act and, in a fit of rage, had murdered Nicole. George Birch took the stand in his own defense. He testified that he had met Nicole at the bar on the night of the murder. After a night of getting close, he offered to give her a ride home. Nicole accepted, and they drove to her house. When they arrived across the street from her home, he claimed they started kissing passionately. They had sex in the back of his car. They were in the back seat, and the car door was open. Suddenly, George claimed he was knocked to the ground by someone. When he awoke, he said Douglas Dietrich was standing over him with a gun. At that point, Nicole was already dead. He claimed Douglas had killed her. Birch alleged that Douglas then threatened him at gunpoint. He ordered George to put Nicole's body in his car, drive to the farm field, and dump her body in a ditch. Terrified for his life, George did as he was told. He got rid of the body. He even saw Nicole's clothes and belongings in the car and threw them out of the window. It was a dramatic and compelling story, a classic case of he said, he said. Both the prosecution and the defense presented their closing arguments, and the case was handed over to the jury. After only 45 minutes of deliberation, a question came from the jury that deeply unsettled the prosecution. They asked if the cord used to strangle Nicole matched a cord found in Douglas's garage. This question suggested that the jury might be believing the defense's narrative, that they might be entertaining the idea that Douglas was in fact the real killer. For a moment, it seemed the case could go either way. However, this doubt was short-lived. After 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. They found George Stephen Birch guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Nicole's husband, Douglas Dietrich, was given only a $1,000 fine for the reckless driving incident involving her sister. Justice, it seemed, had finally been served for Nicole Vander Hayden. Before we move on to our second case, please write your thoughts on this case in the comments section. A comment you leave or a like you give has an incredible impact on helping us reach more people. We now travel to Texas, to the story of the Whitaker family, who lived in the affluent suburb of Sugar Land. On the surface, they were the embodiment of the American dream. A family that seemed to have no problems, a near-perfect picture of success and happiness. The father, Kent, worked in the construction business owned by his family. He was married to his wife, Tricia, an elementary school teacher. They had 2 sons, 23-year-old Bart and 19-year-old Kevin. In December of 2003, the family gathered for a graduation dinner. They were celebrating Bart's successful graduation from Sam Houston State University. At the dinner, Kent and Tricia presented their son Bart with a wonderful gift, a Rolex watch worth $4,000. This was just one of many expensive gifts they had bestowed upon him over the years, which included a luxury car and even a lakeside townhouse. It was a picture of familial pride and generosity. After dinner, the family returned home. As Kevin, the younger son, stepped through the front door, he was met by a masked assailant lying in wait inside the house. The 19-year-old was shot in the chest by the attacker. The bullet struck his heart. Tricia was right behind Kevin, and she too was shot in the chest. Kent was still on the front porch. The young gunman quickly ran out and shot him in the shoulder, the bullet shattering his bone Bart claimed he had returned to his Chevrolet to retrieve his cell phone when he heard the gunshots. He said he ran into the house to confront the shooter. A struggle ensued, and Bart was also shot in the arm. Despite their efforts to neutralize the attacker, the gunman escaped through the back door. Tragically, Kevin died at the scene within minutes of being shot. His mother, Tricia, was airlifted to a hospital, but she passed away en route. The father, Kent, and the older son, Bart, had survived the attack with their injuries. When police arrived at the horrific scene, Bart told emergency responders that the gunman was a black man. The initial police theory was a robbery gone wrong, a tragic but not uncommon crime. However, the evidence at the crime scene did not support this theory. The drawers in the house were only slightly ajar, and none of the expensive items in the home electronics jewelry were out of place. Nothing had been stolen at the scene. Police found a 9mm Glock pistol registered to Kevin and a black leather men's glove lying next to Bart's car. Investigators determined that the gunman had entered the house through a small opening in Kevin's second-floor room. There, he discovered the closet where the gun was kept and stole Kevin's weapon. The gift from Bart. As the investigation continued, detectives uncovered something strange. They learned that Bart had been regularly lying to his family about attending his classes at the university and about the tuition money they had given him. He hadn't been going to school. He hadn't graduated. The entire celebration dinner was based on a lie. This strange piece of information seemed irrelevant to the murder. At first, a minor deception in the face of a great tragedy. But at that moment, a man contacted the police. This man, who had attended Clements High School with Bart, told detectives that just 2 years prior, Bart had asked him to help murder his family. The plan Bart had laid out was chillingly identical to what had just occurred. According to the plan, the man was to be the gunman waiting inside the house while the family was out for dinner. When the family returned, he was to shoot and kill Kent, Tricia, and Kevin. He was also supposed to shoot Bart in the arm to make it look like he was also a target. This man's statement did not surprise the detectives as much as it might have, because this was not the first time they had heard of such a plot. Kent and Tricia themselves had been contacted by the police in the past, who had informed them of a plan to have them killed. In the year 2000, another man had called the police after hearing about the plot. The police had informed the Whitaker family about this strange tip. Bart, however, had convinced his parents that it was a ridiculous accusation, a complete misunderstanding. The man who came forward now was afraid of going to prison for his role in the previous conspiracy. He agreed to help the investigation if he would not face charges. To do this, he agreed to record his conversations with Bart. In one of these conversations, Bart offered the man $20,000 to lie to the police about the old conspiracy. The police quickly issued an arrest warrant for Bart Whitaker, but it was too late. Bart's Chevrolet was found abandoned next to an apartment complex in Houston. The search was on, but there was no trace of Bart. Police began interrogating his friends to find out where he was. They spoke with many people, including his roommate, Chris Brasher, and his colleague, Stephen Champagne. The police monitored the phones of both young men and even brought their families to the station for questioning about the murder. The questioning of his family was the last straw for Stephen Champagne. He contacted the police, didn't know where Bart was, but he confessed that he had picked up his friend Bart from his house on the night of the murder. He claimed that Chris Brashear was the shooter in the murder, hired by Bart. Finally, the murder plot was revealed. The only thing left was to catch Bart. A man who had heard about the reward money offered for Bart's arrest then contacted the police. This man, named Rudy, was the one who had helped Bart escape. He told them he had given Bart his own identity. He claimed that in exchange for the identity swap, Bart had given him $3,000 and then fled to Mexico. After the murders, Bart had settled in Mexico using Rudy's identity. He even found a job at a furniture store in the city of Saravo. He told bizarre stories, claiming that the bullet wound in his shoulder was a war injury from Afghanistan, that he was an orphan, and that his mother had been a prostitute. Detectives in the United States collaborated with Mexican authorities, and Bart was arrested without incident on immigration charges. Bart Whitaker had planned the horrific murders to get his hands on a $1 million inheritance. He had told Stephen Champagne and Chris Brasher that if they executed the plan perfectly, he would pay them millions from the inheritance. The puzzle was complete, but the story was about to take its most unbelievable turn yet. The unraveling of Bart Whitaker's monstrous conspiracy led to a series of legal proceedings that laid bare the depths of his betrayal. Chris Brasher, the man who pulled the trigger and ended the lives of Tricia and Kevin Whitaker, was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Stephen Champagne, who served as the getaway driver and later became the prosecution's key witness, received a much lighter sentence of 15 years in prison for his cooperation. He is now a free man. For Bart Whitaker, the mastermind the jury needed only half an hour to find him guilty of the murders and to sentence him to death. The state of Texas, known for its prolific use of capital punishment, scheduled his execution. It seemed that Bart's story was destined to end on a gurney in the Huntsville unit, paying the ultimate price for his patricide and fratricide. But then, in a twist that is almost unparalleled in the annals of true crime, a campaign began to spare Bart's life. The person leading this campaign, fighting with every fiber of his being to save the man who had orchestrated the slaughter of his family, was none other than Bart's only surviving victim, his father, Kent Whitaker. Kent's journey from a grieving victim to his son's staunchest advocate is a profound and complex exploration of faith, forgiveness, and paternal love. In the aftermath of the attack, Kent was faced with an impossible reality. The son he had doted on, the son for whom he had just thrown a celebratory dinner, had meticulously planned his and his wife's and other sons' deaths, all for an inheritance he likely would have received anyway. The physical pain of his shattered shoulder paled in comparison to the psychological agony of this betrayal. Yet, through his Christian faith, Kent began a process of what he described as radical forgiveness. He came to believe that he had already forgiven Bart before he even knew his son was the culprit. He argued that if he, a flawed human, could find it in his heart to forgive his son, then the state, in its capacity as an agent of justice, should also choose mercy over retribution. He wrote a book about his experience, titled Murder by the Grace of God, detailing his struggle and his ultimate decision to choose love over hate. Kent's campaign was relentless. He argued that executing Bart would not bring back Tricia and Kevin. It would only cause him, the sole survivor, to become a victim once more, this time at the hands of the state. He pleaded with prosecutors, with the parole board, and with the public, telling his story and advocating for a different kind of justice, one rooted in mercy rather than vengeance. "The death of my son will not bring me peace," he stated repeatedly. "It will only compound the tragedy." Bart Whitaker's execution was scheduled for February 22, 2018. He was moved to the death house. He ate his last meal. The final preparations were underway. The clock was ticking down. Just 40 minutes before Bart was scheduled to be executed by lethal injection, his father's persistence paid off. Kent Whitaker's pleas had reached the ears of the Texas governor, Greg Abbott. In a rare and dramatic move, Governor Abbott commuted Bart's death sentence to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was the first time Governor Abbott had granted clemency to a death row inmate. He released a statement explaining his decision, noting that Bart's father passionately opposes the execution of his son, believing it would only compound his family's tragedy. The governor acknowledged that Bart Whitaker was still responsible for his heinous crimes, but that the powerful testimony of his father could not be ignored. Today, Bart Whitaker is serving his life sentence in a Texas prison. And his father, Kent, the man whose life Bart tried to end, regularly visits him. He continues to love and support his son, the killer of his wife and other son. Kent's story is a staggering testament to the human capacity for forgiveness, choice that many find incomprehensible, but one that he insists was the only way for him to truly heal and honor the memory of the family he lost. He chose to break the cycle of violence and hate, not with another death, but with an act of radical grace. The Whitaker family story, which began with a picture-perfect lie, ended with a difficult, painful, and profoundly human truth about the enduring and sometimes bewildering power of a father's love.